Hello, my name is Logan Carter. I'm 33 years old and have weathered enough scorching sunny days and freezing rain to know that life is never easy. I was born and raised in Bozeman, Montana, where endless fields of grass stretch under a vast blue sky, where the wind carries the scent of earth and childhood memories. But I left my hometown at 18, not out of disdain, but because I wanted to stand on my own, to prove I didn't need to rely on anyone. I love machines, the way complex systems hum together to come alive, and so I became an auto mechanic. It's not a glamorous job, but to me it's everything. I now live in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a small rented apartment on the second floor of an old red brick building in the suburbs. The apartment isn't anything special. Creaky wooden floors, windows overlooking a quiet street dotted with aging maple trees, and a small kitchen always faintly scented with the familiar aroma of my wife's curry. In the backyard below is a small garage where I tinker with cars after hours, immersed in the smell of motor oil and the rumble of engines. The work is grueling, but every time I open a hood and hear an engine purr smoothly after a repair, I feel a weight lift off me. That's my one true pride, the thing that makes me believe I have control over a small piece of this life. My family consists of three: me, Grace, and Sophie, our little daughter. Grace, 31, is the strongest woman I know, though she'd never admit it. She works at a fast food restaurant in town, enduring long shifts for pay that's barely enough to dream on, yet she keeps our apartment tidy and warm. Every evening when I come home exhausted and reeking of motor oil, Grace sets a steaming bowl of curry in front of me, smiles gently and asks, "Anything interesting happened today, love?" She knows the answer is usually a tired shake of my head, but she asks anyway, as if reminding me that no matter how harsh the world is, I have a place to come home to. Sophie, our 6-year-old daughter, is the light of my life. She has big, bright eyes and a smile that melts everything. But her tiny heart isn't strong. Sophie was born with a congenital heart condition. At 4, she underwent major surgery, and we thought things would be okay. I still remember that day, sitting outside the operating room, clutching Grace's hand, neither of us speaking, just praying. When the doctor came out and said Sophie had made it through, I broke down crying like a child. But now, she still needs regular checkups and daily medication, and every time I see her tired, it feels like my heart is being squeezed. Since Sophie's diagnosis, life has never been easy for us. One late autumn afternoon under Fort Collins' gray sky, Grace and I took Sophie for a routine checkup. The exam room was cold, reeking of antiseptic, and the doctor's expression sent a chill through me. He said Sophie's heart valve was weakening. If she didn't have a second surgery within 3 months, she might not make it. Beside him, the financial coordinator spoke softly. The estimated cost is around $70,000. $70,000. The number hit me like a knife to the chest. Grace sat beside me, her hand gripping Sophie so tightly it turned pale. I tried to keep my voice steady, asking the doctor a few questions, but my mind was blank. $70,000. A sum we'd never seen in our lives. On the drive home, the car was silent as a tomb. Sophie dozed in the back seat while Grace stared out the window, her eyes red. I took her hand and said, "We'll find a way. I promise." But inside I knew that promise was as fragile as morning mist. The weight pressed down on my shoulders, and for the first time I felt small, powerless against fate. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage, staring at the tools lying quietly under the fluorescent light. The wind whistled through the door's cracks, carrying the biting chill of approaching winter. I thought of Sophie, her smile, the way she calls Dad when I walk through the door. I thought of Grace, the nights she stayed up late mending my clothes, the way she always tried to be strong for both of us. And I thought of the $70,000, a towering wall standing between us and the future. I began searching for every possible way to make money. I took on a night job at another auto repair shop about 10 miles from home. By day, I worked in my familiar garage, sweating under fluorescent lights, my hands stained with motor oil. At night, I drove my old pickup truck to the new shop, where the smell of gasoline and the sound of air compressors blended into the cold darkness. The work there was tougher, mostly fixing large trucks, but the pay was slightly better. I told myself that if I pushed just a little harder, I'd have a chance. The first few days I had enough strength to endure. But soon my body began to protest. My calloused hands, cracked and bleeding from wielding a wrench day and night, ached with every turn of a bolt, my joints feeling like they might come apart. My eyes burned from lack of sleep and my back throbbed as if a boulder were pressing down on it. But I didn't stop. Every dollar I earned felt like a drop of medicine for Sophie's fragile heart. I told myself just one more shift, one more day, and I'll be closer to that money. While I threw myself into work, Grace grew more distant. She was no longer the woman who smiled and placed a bowl of curry in front of me each evening. She started losing sleep, her eyes shadowed with dark circles, her hair tangled from neglecting herself. I often found her sitting silently in the kitchen under the dim yellow light, staring at a pile of bills stacked on the table. They were like sharp knives cutting into our hope. "Logan, what are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling, but all I could do was hold her hand and say, "I'll find a way." The truth was, I had no clear plan, only desperation and a fragile belief that I had to make it work. As time passed, Grace sank deeper into fear. Every time Sophie coughed, even softly, she turned away, her shoulders shaking. I knew she was crying, but she didn't want me to see. She began blaming me, though she never said it outright. If you made more money, if you worked harder, maybe Sophie wouldn't have to suffer like this, her eyes seemed to say. Our dinners became silent, filled only with the clink of spoons against bowls and Sophie's innocent chatter. An invisible wall grew taller between Grace and me, and I didn't know how to tear it down. I wanted to hold her, to tell her I was scared and hurting too, but I couldn't. I had to be strong because if I collapsed, our family would fall apart. I kept trying. Every morning I kissed Sophie's forehead before heading to work, watching her sleep soundly on her small bed, clutching her red teddy bear. "I'll be home early, Angel," I whispered, knowing I wouldn't be back before midnight. I believed that if I worked harder, if I didn't give up, everything would be okay. But Grace no longer believed that. She watched Sophie grow weaker, her lips pale and her breath short, and I saw her eyes go empty as if she'd lost all hope. I wanted to scream, to tell her I was trying my best, but I couldn't. I just bowed my head, kept turning wrenches and fixed machines to drown out the pain in my heart. Then one evening, everything fell apart. A torrential rain battered Fort Collins, the drops pounding the windows as if trying to break into our small apartment. Sophie was playing with her crayons when she suddenly clutched her chest, her little face pale. "Dad, it hurts," she whispered, her voice frail. My heart stopped. I scooped her up and ran to the car, rain lashing my face. Grace stood at the door, hands covering her face, but she didn't come with us. "I'll take her. Stay here and wait," I said quickly, too frantic to think. All I knew was I had to get Sophie to the hospital. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Rain whipped the windshield, streetlights flashing across my face, drenched in sweat and tears. Sophie lay in the back seat, her breathing faint. "Hold on, sweetheart, Dad's here," I muttered, driving and praying. I begged God, begged anyone listening, to let her pull through. The rain drowned out all sound, but I could still hear my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. The doctors rushed Sophie into the emergency room. I stood in the hallway, hands trembling, my soaked clothes clinging to my body. The minutes dragged on like centuries. I thought of Sophie. I couldn't lose her. I couldn't. Finally, the doctor came out saying Sophie had stabilized but needed to stay for observation. I nodded, feeling as if I'd been pulled from the edge of an abyss. But when I asked about costs, the doctor's eyes darkened. "We'll do what we can, but you need to prepare more funds. Sophie's condition can't wait long." I returned home near dawn, my legs heavy as lead. The rain had stopped, but the air was still freezing. I opened the door, hoping to see Grace waiting with a hot cup of coffee, as she always did. But the apartment was eerily silent. The living room light was on, but no one was there. The cold smell of leftover curry lingered in the kitchen, dishes untouched on the table. I called Grace's name, but only my echo answered. Then I saw it, a short letter on the table in Grace's trembling handwriting. "Logan, I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore. This life is too heavy and I'm not strong enough. I love you and Sophie, but I can't go on. Please forgive me." I stood there holding the letter, feeling the world collapse beneath me. Grace's belongings were gone. A few shirts from the closet, the shoes she always wore, the blue handbag Sophie had drawn on. She had left, abandoning me and Sophie, leaving the apartment empty and my heart shattered. I sank into a chair, not crying, not angry. Just a deep, hollow void, as if part of me had vanished with her. I blamed myself. If I were better, if I earned more, maybe Grace wouldn't have left. But I had no time to wallow in pain. Sophie was still in the hospital and I had to be strong for her. I drove back to the hospital and sat by Sophie's bed. She woke up, her big round eyes looking at me. "Where's Mom, Dad?" she asked, her voice weak but hopeful. I forced a smile, though my heart was breaking. "Mom's on a trip far away, sweetheart. She's trying to make money to help you." The lie choked me, but I couldn't let Sophie know the truth. She nodded, trusting me completely, then took my hand, her small, cold fingers somehow warm. From that day, I became both father and mother to Sophie. I took time off work to care for her. Every time she smiled, it gave me strength. But I knew this battle was just beginning. I had to carry it all alone. Responsibility, love, and pain. But no matter how strong I tried to be, I couldn't shake the shadow of the $70,000. That sum loomed like an invisible monster, growling in every dream, every breath I took. I had worked myself to exhaustion, my hands bleeding, my back aching. But the money I earned was like a drop of water in a desert. Each time I looked at Sophie, her bright eyes growing increasingly tired, I felt time slipping away too quickly. I needed a way out, a miracle, and I knew I couldn't keep going alone. After 2 weeks of struggling, I decided to do something I had sworn I'd never do. Return to Denver and face my parents. I never thought I'd have to beg them, not after everything that had happened. But for Sophie, I was ready to swallow my pride and confront the past. I arranged for Sophie to stay at the hospital under the nurse's care, kissed her forehead, and said, "Dad's going on a short trip, Angel. Be good, okay?" Sophie nodded, clutching her red teddy bear, her weak smile tightening my heart. The drive from Fort Collins to Denver felt longer than I remembered. My old pickup truck rattled with every acceleration, as if it were as weary as I was. The scenery, barren fields and distant hazy mountains, stirred childhood memories, but none of them were pleasant. I grew up in a wealthy but cold family. My parents, Harold and Martha Carter, owned Carter Automotive Supply, a long-standing auto parts distribution company in Colorado. They lived for profit and prestige, and in their world, I was always the spare child. My younger brother, Jonathan, was their pride, the son with a future, destined to inherit the family empire. I, Logan, was the stubborn one, more interested in machines than numbers, and for that, I was deemed a failure. At 18, I left Bozeman, cutting all ties with my family. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own without their pity or their biting comparisons. But now, sitting in the truck, gripping the steering wheel, I felt smaller than ever. I wasn't there to reconcile or seek forgiveness. I was there for Sophie, the only reason I could stomach facing the past. My parents' house in Denver was just as I remembered, gleaming under the winter sun. A white mansion with tall windows, a perfectly manicured garden, and a glossy iron gate. I parked, took a deep breath, and tried to quell the trembling in my chest. As I walked in, I saw Jonathan in the driveway, laughing with my parents beside a brand new Mercedes. My father, Harold, clapped Jonathan on the shoulder, his voice brimming with pride. "This car will impress your partners." "Well done, Jonathan." I glanced at the car, at least $150,000, more than double what I needed to save Sophie. My heart stung, but I stayed silent and approached. Harold looked at me, his eyes flickering with surprise before turning cold. Martha, my mother, gave a curt nod, her lips pressed tight. Jonathan looked awkward, avoiding my gaze. "Logan," My father said, his voice dry. "What are you doing here?" No greeting, no embrace. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in the house where I grew up. I took a breath and got to the point. "Sophie, my daughter, is very sick. She needs heart surgery and it costs $70,000. I don't have enough. I'm here to ask for your help." I tried to keep my voice steady, but each word felt like a stab at my pride. I told them about Sophie, her pain, and how I'd worked myself to exhaustion but still fell short. I hoped, even just a little, that they'd feel something for their granddaughter. But Harold just stared at me, his eyes unmoved. "70,000, he said, his tone like he was calculating profit margins. "That's a lot of money, Logan. And for what? A surgery that might not even work? I don't invest in things that don't pay off." His words hit like a slap to the face. Martha shook her head, adding, "Logan, we raised you long enough. You have to handle your own life now." Jonathan stood there, silent, staring at his polished shoes. I stood frozen, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to scream, to ask how they could turn their backs on their dying granddaughter, but I couldn't. My pride was already in pieces, but I refused to let them see me weak. I just nodded and said softly, "Thanks for your time." Then I turned and walked out of the brightly lit house. Rain began to fall, cold drops soaking into my jacket, mingling with the burning pain in my chest. On the drive back to Fort Collins, I didn't cry. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to keep myself from breaking. The rejection from my family wasn't just a refusal. It was a reminder that there had never been a real bond between us. I thought of Sophie, her smile, and told myself that no matter who turned their back, I wouldn't give up. When I reached the hospital, it was dark. Sophie was asleep, her pale face lit by the dim glow of the hospital room. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, feeling the faint warmth of her small fingers. The doctor came in, checked a few monitors, and said softly, "She's stable for now, but we need to continue treatment." He looked at me as if wanting to say more, but then left quietly. Minutes later, a woman in a blue uniform entered. She carried a folder, her voice gentle but distant. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, but we can't continue treatment if the outstanding bills aren't paid. You'll need to secure more funds if you want Sophie to stay here." Her words were the final blow. I looked at Sophie, then out the window where the rain still fell relentlessly. Every door of hope had closed, and I knew I was truly alone. In the days that followed, I plunged into a desperate race. My parents had turned their backs, Grace had left, and I was left with only myself. I started knocking on every door, friends, colleagues, even people I'd helped in the past. I went to Jake at the garage, the only friend who always checked on me with genuine concern. "Jake, I need to borrow money," I said, my voice hoarse with shame. "Anything you can spare. Sophie needs surgery." Jake looked at me, his eyes full of regret. "Logan, I've only got a few $100. You know I'm behind on rent myself." He pressed some crumpled bills into my hand, but his expression said it all. He wanted to help, but he couldn't. I kept reaching out to others. The owner of the grocery store where Grace used to shop, the neighbor who brought us cookies, even the grumpy night shift boss at the repair shop. But the answers were always the same. "I'm so sorry, Logan." Or worse, they avoided my gaze, muttering vague apologies. I didn't blame them. Everyone has their own struggles, and $70,000 isn't something people can easily lend. I started selling anything of value. My old pickup truck, my faithful companion through countless rainy nights, went for $3,000. A drop in the bucket compared to the hospital debt. I sold my wedding ring, the last remnant of happier days with Grace. The pawn shop owner looked at me with pity, handing me $500. I sold the old TV, the noisy fridge, anything in the apartment that could be turned into cash. But it all added up to so little. The $70,000 loomed like an insurmountable mountain, and I was just a climber with bloodied hands, never reaching the peak. The hospital began scaling back Sophie's care. Her private room was swapped for a shared one, filled with the hum of machines and the groans of other patients. Nurses came less often and her medications were reduced to cut costs. I sat by her bed watching the IV drip, feeling time slip through my fingers. She still tried to smile, still held my hand, but her pale lips and shallow breaths crushed my heart. "Dad, when can I go home?" Sophie asked, her voice clear but fragile. I forced a smile, my eyes stinging. "Soon, my angel," I replied, but inside I knew I was lying. I went back to work, saving every penny of my meager wages. My body was falling apart, eyes sunken from exhaustion, moments of dizziness forcing me to stop on the side of the road. But I couldn't rest. I ate cheap sandwiches, drank cold coffee to stay alert, and kept turning wrenches, fixing engines as if work was the only thing keeping me upright. But every time I returned to the hospital, Sophie was a little weaker. She spoke less, drew less, and sometimes just lay there, staring out the window with distant eyes. One early winter morning, the doctor called me into a private room. He avoided my gaze, his voice low. "Sophie's condition is worsening. We want to continue treatment, but you need to speak with the financial department." He paused, then added softly, "I'm sorry, Carter." As I stepped into the hallway, a hospital staff member was waiting. She held a folder, speaking softly, almost afraid to break me. "Mr. Carter, if you can't clear the outstanding balance, the hospital will have to stop treatment." I stood frozen, the world collapsing beneath me. I pleaded, my voice breaking, "Please give me more time. I'll find a way." But she only bowed her head, whispering, "I'm sorry, we're just following policy." The next day, they informed me Sophie would be transferred to home care. I knew it was a polite way of saying they were giving up on her. I carried her out of the hospital, holding her tightly as if letting go would make her vanish. The Fort Collins rain was icy, the drops stinging my face, mingling with my tears. Sophie gave a weak smile and whispered, "The rain sounds like singing, doesn't it, Dad?" I nodded, choking back a sob. "Yeah, sweetheart. Like singing." Back at the apartment, I laid Sophie on the old sofa where she used to sit and draw red cars. I wrapped her in blankets, trying to keep her warm. But I knew I was powerless. I had no medicine, no medical equipment, nothing but love and hopeless prayers. I sat beside her, holding her hand, telling her the stories she loved. About faraway trips I promised to take her on when she got better. But every word felt like a knife I was driving into my own heart. 2 weeks later, on a freezing morning, Sophie passed away. She lay in my arms on that old sofa, her breaths growing fainter until they stopped. I held her tightly, feeling her small body grow cold in my arms. Outside, the rain fell steadily, cold and relentless, like the last beats of my heart. I didn't cry out loud. I just sat there, silent, staring at Sophie's face as she slipped into an eternal sleep. She looked peaceful, as if finally free from pain. But me, I felt like I had died with her. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, maybe a whole day. The rain drowned out all sound, but in my mind, Sophie's laughter echoed clear and distant. I picked up the drawing beside her, my trembling fingers tracing the smudged colors. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I tried, but I wasn't good enough." The days that followed were like living as a ghost. The small apartment felt colder than ever, as if Sophie's warmth had taken the soul of this place with her. I didn't turn on the lights or cook, just sat silently on the old sofa where she had passed. Every corner of the house was filled with memories, her red teddy bear lying alone in a corner, her drawings taped to the fridge, her laughter echoing faintly in my mind. But she was gone, and I felt like I was no longer myself. I arranged Sophie's funeral, though every step felt like walking on thorns. I didn't have money for anything grand, but I wanted her to be sent off properly. At the funeral home, I chose a small oak coffin, simple but warm. I requested an inscription, "Sophie Carter, Daddy's little light." It was all I could do, a final promise to let her know that even though she was gone, she would always be the light of my life. I called my parents, my voice trembling as I informed them of Sophie's death. "The funeral is on Saturday at the small cemetery east of Fort Collins," I said, hoping, even just a little, that they'd come, that they'd want to say goodbye to their only granddaughter. My father, Harold, only mumbled over the phone, his voice cold. "I'll see if we can make it." My mother, Martha, said nothing, just sighed. I hung up, feeling another stab in my heart. The day of the funeral arrived, and Fort Collins was shrouded in a gray winter morning. A light snow fell, dusting the bare trees outside the cemetery. The wind swept through, carrying a bone-chilling cold. I stood there, hands clenched, watching Sophie's small coffin rest on the frozen ground. No lavish wreaths, no large family gathering. Just a few neighbors and co-workers from the garage came, quietly patting my shoulder. Jake stood beside me, saying nothing, just resting his hand on my shoulder to share the pain. I nodded in gratitude, but my eyes were empty, as if my soul had left with Sophie. I looked around, searching for my parents or even Jonathan, but no one showed up. I had called them again before the funeral to make sure they knew. "We'll try, but don't count on it," my mother had said, her voice flat, as if Sophie's death wasn't worth their concern. I didn't ask more, just hung up, feeling slapped once again. But I didn't expect the next blow to hurt even more. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, I stayed by Sophie's grave, watching snow slowly cover the headstone. I placed her red teddy bear on it, the one she always held while waiting for me to come home. The wind was frigid, but I didn't want to leave. This was the last time I could be with her, the last time I could protect her. I knelt, touching the headstone, and whispered, "I love you, Sophie. I'll always love you." On the way home, I took out my phone to text thanks to those who came. But then a notification popped up from an app I rarely used. It was a post from Jonathan, my brother, a family photo taken at some luxury resort in Aspen. My parents, Harold and Martha, stood beside Jonathan and his wife, all four smiling brightly by a cozy fireplace, Christmas lights twinkling in the background. Jonathan's caption read, "Precious family time. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for this amazing trip." I froze on the sidewalk, the phone slipping into the snow. A wave of pain surged in my chest, as if someone had torn my heart apart. They hadn't just refused to help save Sophie or ignored my pleas. They chose to go on a vacation, laughing and smiling while I buried my daughter. While Sophie, their granddaughter, lay under cold earth. This second slap hurt more than the first. Not just a rejection, but a complete denial of Sophie's existence, of my existence, of the pain I carried. I picked up the phone, hands trembling, and deleted the notification. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to think of them anymore. But the image clung to me, a wound that would never heal. I drove home, my mind blank. The apartment greeted me with a deathly silence. No more of Sophie's laughter, no more of Grace's curry. Just me, alone, with a pain as heavy as the world on my shoulders. That night I sat on the sofa where Sophie had passed. I opened an old beer from the fridge but couldn't drink it. I just sat there thinking of the days gone by, of how I'd tried, fought, but still couldn't keep Sophie with me. I thought of my parents, of Jonathan, of their smiles in that photo, and I wondered why. Why could they turn their backs on me, on Sophie, so easily? I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I had no tears left. I stood and walked to Sophie's drawing, touching the smudged red lines. "I promise, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'll keep living for you. I won't let you fade away." That small promise was the only thing keeping me upright. I didn't know where I'd go or what I'd do, but I knew I couldn't give up. Not for me, but for Sophie. For the little light that still lived in me, even if only as a memory. I went back to work at the garage, but I was no longer the Logan I used to be. I worked like a machine, hands turning wrenches, eyes fixed on engines, but my mind drifted elsewhere. I lost track of time, sometimes forgetting to eat. Jake, my co-worker and friend, would often press a cheap sandwich or a cold cup of coffee into my hand, saying, "You gotta eat something, Logan. You'll collapse otherwise." I nodded, shoving the food in my mouth, but I couldn't taste it. Everything was dull, as if the world had lost its color since Sophie left. My co-workers noticed the change in me. They looked at me quieter than before, my sunken eyes and gaunt face betraying me. Jake tried asking a few times, his voice full of concern. "You okay, Logan? Say something, man." I just shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." But I wasn't fine. They knew it, and I knew they wanted to help, but no one dared ask more. Maybe they saw the pain in my eyes, a pain I couldn't hide no matter how hard I tried. In the evenings, when the garage lights dimmed, I'd sit alone in the small backyard garage. The empty space where my pickup truck once parked was now just a patch of concrete stained with oil. I sat there, staring into the darkness, remembering the rainy nights when I carried Sophie to the car, driving and praying she'd make it. The faint smell of gasoline lingered in the air, mingling with the biting cold of winter. I wondered if I had been faster, stronger, would Sophie still be here? But no answer came, only the cold wind whistling through the door's cracks, as if reminding me that it was all over. Sometimes I turned on the old radio in the garage, the one Sophie used to fiddle with when she was little. Through its crackling speaker, her voice would come alive, singing a childish tune, distorted but clear. "Listen to me sing, Daddy," she'd once chirped, giggling as I pretended to applaud. Now that song was the only proof she'd ever existed, that she'd been my little light. I sat in silence, letting the sound fill the cold void as if turning off the radio would make Sophie disappear forever. I thought about leaving Fort Collins, starting over in a new place where there were no memories of Sophie, of Grace, of those painful days. I imagined beginning again in a strange state where no one knew who I was. But every time I started packing, I stopped. Every street in Fort Collins, every diner, every gas station I'd passed held traces of Sophie. The fast food joint where Grace worked, the corner where Sophie loved pointing at red cars, the hospital where I begged for her to live. They were all part of her. If I left, I feared her memory would fade like snow melting in the sun, and I couldn't bear that. My finances were dwindling. After the funeral, I'd sold nearly everything in the apartment. The old kitchen table, the armchair Grace loved, even the bed we used to share. But the money only covered rent and some lingering medical bills. I had to cut back on night shifts at the other shop because my body couldn't take it anymore. Some nights I coughed uncontrollably, my chest aching from the cold and exhaustion. I drank coffee to stay alert, but sometimes my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold a wrench. I knew I was breaking down, but I still got up each morning, grabbed my tool bag, and went out. Work was the only thing keeping me from collapsing, the only way to avoid facing the emptiness inside. Every morning before work, I stood before Sophie's drawing taped to the wall. I placed my hand on it, feeling the rough paper under my calloused fingers. "I'm still here, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'll keep living for both of us." That promise was the tiny flame keeping me going, even though sometimes I didn't know what I was living for. Days passed and I lived like a shadow, caught in a cycle of work and lonely nights. Once Jake dragged me out for a beer, trying to get me to talk. "Logan, you can't keep going like this," he said, his voice low. "Sophie wouldn't want to see you this way." I looked at him, wanting to say I didn't know any other way, that Sophie was the only reason I'd ever lived. But I just nodded, took a sip of beer, and returned to my cold apartment. Fort Collins slipped into spring, but the chill of winter still clung to the air. One dreary afternoon, a light rain fell, coating the garage yard with a thin, wet sheen. I stood outside, my work jacket soaked with sweat and motor oil, gripping a wrench as I wrestled with an old truck's engine that roared like it was about to explode. The steady patter of rain mingled with the clank of metal, creating a monotonous sound, like the rhythm of my life now, repetitive, purposeless. Suddenly, a sharp screech of brakes cut through the air. Tires skidded on the wet road, and I looked up to see a sleek black Porsche lurch to a stop by the curb. White smoke poured from the hood, carrying the acrid smell of burnt metal. I set the wrench down, wiped my hands on my jacket, and hurried over. A young woman stepped out of the driver's seat, elegant but flustered. She wore a long wool coat, now damp with rain, and her high heels were caked with red mud. She fumbled with the hood, her hands trembling, clearly unsure of what to do. "Let me help," I said, my voice low but clear enough for her to hear. She looked up, her eyes startled, but then nodded and stepped aside. "Don't worry, I'll check it out," I reassured her. Within minutes, I found the issue. A serious brake system failure, with the brake pads nearly worn to nothing. If she'd driven a few more miles, the car could have lost control entirely. I shook my head, thinking how lucky she was to stop in time. I guided her to back the car into the garage, then rummaged through the storage for a set of old brake pads I had left. They weren't top quality, but they'd keep the car safe until she could get to a proper service center. I worked quickly, my hands deftly swapping parts, checking the oil and tires. When I finished, I wiped my hands and stood. "It's good to go," I told her. "But get it to a Porsche specialist as soon as you can." She looked at me, still a bit shaken. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "How much do I owe you?" I shook my head, giving a faint smile. "No charge. Just stay safe." She looked surprised, as if she couldn't believe a grimy mechanic would work for free. But I just wanted to get back to my task, to escape the world for a while. She pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to me. "I'm Charlotte Brooks," she said, her voice steadier. "If you ever want to work somewhere that appreciates your skills, call me." I nodded, tucking the card into my work jacket without much thought. "Thanks," I said, then returned to the truck waiting for me. But as she drove away, I felt something unfamiliar stir inside me. A faint flicker of light in the darkness of my life. 3 days later, Charlotte returned. I was under a Ford, hands smeared with oil, when I heard the tap of high heels on the concrete floor. I slid out and saw her standing there, still in her wool coat, but smiling this time. "The Porsche ran perfectly," she said, her eyes bright. "I took it to a service center and they said you did an amazing job. Those old brake pads saved me from a disaster." I nodded, unsure what to say beyond, "Good to hear." But Charlotte didn't stop there. She glanced around the rundown garage, its peeling walls and cluttered tools, then looked straight at me. "Logan, have you ever thought about working somewhere bigger?" she asked. "My father's company, Brooks Automotive Group, is looking for someone with your skills. Good pay, professional environment. You deserve it." I froze for a moment. Her offer was like a gust of fresh air blowing into my stifling life. I looked around the garage where I'd poured years of sweat, where memories of Sophie lingered, days when I'd carried her out here, letting her play with tools and giggle. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice low. Charlotte nodded, giving me a gentle smile, then left. But the business card in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, as if it carried a possibility I hadn't dared to consider. That evening, the apartment was as cold and quiet as ever. I sat on the sofa, my eyes weary, but for the first time a little brighter. I held Charlotte's card, my fingers tracing the embossed letters. I thought of Sophie, of her smile, of how she always wanted me to be strong. "Maybe you'd want me to try again, huh?" I whispered, as if Sophie were sitting there listening. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling as I dialed Charlotte's number. It rang a few times before her voice came through, light but energetic. "Hello, who's this?" "It's Logan," I said. There was a brief pause, then her voice brightened. "Logan? I was hoping you'd call." I took a breath and said, "I want to try. The job at Brooks Automotive Group. I want to do it." Charlotte laughed, her voice warm over the phone. "Great. Tomorrow, come to our headquarters in Denver. I'll be waiting." I hung up, feeling like I'd just stepped through a door without knowing where it led. I looked at Sophie's drawing, its faded red lines still vibrant in my eyes. "I'll make it, sweetheart," I whispered. "For you, I'll try." The next day, I drove to Denver, my heart heavy but laced with a spark of hope. The Brooks Automotive Group headquarters sat on the city's outskirts, a sleek modern building with gleaming glass windows and a large logo etched on the gate. Charlotte greeted me in the lobby, her confident smile intact. "Welcome, Logan," she said, leading me into a spacious office. She introduced me to the technical director, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. "Show us what you can do," he said. I nodded and stepped into the workshop where rows of polished luxury cars gleamed. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal calmed me. They pointed me to a BMW with an engine issue that had stumped the other technicians. I got to work, listening to the engine's hum, smelling the burnt fuel, feeling every vibration. Within minutes, I pinpointed a subtle fault in the ignition system, a detail someone had overlooked. I fixed it, my hands moving swiftly as they always had in my old garage. When the engine purred smoothly, the technical director nodded, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Well done, Carter," he said. "Welcome to the team." From my first days at Brooks Automotive Group, I worked as if it were my last chance. I had no fancy degrees, but I had experience, calloused hands, and a heart that kept reminding me to live up to the promise I made to Sophie. I diagnosed engine issues by their sound alone, repaired luxury cars with a precision no engineer in the team could match. My colleagues began to look at me differently, not with the pity I'd seen in Fort Collins, but with respect. A young guy named Mike, new to the trade, once asked, "Logan, how do you know exactly what's wrong just by listening?" I smiled, shaking my head. "Do it long enough and you'll get it." But inside, I knew it wasn't just experience. It was how I kept myself alive, how I kept Sophie alive in every hum of an engine. Charlotte frequently visited the service center to oversee operations and train staff. She wore crisp suits, her hair tied high, but her eyes were always warm when they met mine. I began to realize she wasn't just the person who got me the job. She saw something in me that I'd long forgotten. One day, during a lunch break, she pulled me aside by the coffee machine, handing me a hot cup. "You're doing great, Logan," she said softly. "But have you ever thought about giving yourself a chance to really live?" I looked at her, unsure how to respond. Really live? I'd forgotten what that felt like since Sophie's passing. The more we talked, the more I saw Charlotte was different. She was smart, strong, but deeply genuine. One afternoon, while inspecting a new batch of parts together, she asked out of the blue, "Do you have a family, Logan?" The question grazed my heart like a knife. I told her about Sophie, about carrying her through the rain, about how she slipped away. I didn't mention Grace or my parents, but Charlotte listened, her eyes gentle, non-judgmental. "You're stronger than you think," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt someone truly saw me. Not the mechanic, not the failed father, but Logan, a person. Our connection grew through small moments. Conversations by the coffee machine, glances exchanged while working on a car, smiles I hadn't realized I'd begun to return. A few months later, Charlotte invited me to dinner. "Just a meal, Logan," she said with a playful smile. "Don't make me beg." I agreed, and that night in a small Denver restaurant under warm golden lights, I felt my heart beat again, if only faintly. Our relationship began quiet but sincere. Charlotte brought a new breeze into my shadowed life. I started laughing more, working harder, and for the first time I felt I had a reason to try. Not just for Sophie, but for myself. My colleagues noticed the change. Mike teased, "Logan, you're looking lively these days." Got a secret? I just smiled, shaking my head, but inside I knew Charlotte was the light I hadn't expected to find. But happiness never comes without challenges. One day, Charlotte called me to the main office of Brooks Automotive Group. "My dad wants to meet you," she said, her voice tinged with tension. Richard Brooks, Charlotte's father and the company's chairman, was a powerful man with eyes sharp as knives. I'd heard of him. Pragmatic, uncompromising, but fair. I braced myself, knowing he'd likely heard about our relationship. In Richard's office, he sat behind a large desk, sizing me up from head to toe. Charlotte stood nearby, trying to stay calm, but I saw her hands clench. "Logan Carter," Richard said, his voice deep and cutting. "I had you looked into. Your circumstances haven't been easy." I nodded, expecting a rejection, a declaration that I wasn't good enough for his daughter. But he continued, I don't judge you by your background. I judge you by how you rise above it. Charlotte believes in you and I trust her. But I want to see you strive harder, to be worthy of her, not just in work, but in life." His words weren't a dismissal, but a challenge. Charlotte looked at me, her eyes shining as if she knew I wouldn't let her down. I nodded and said, "I'll prove it with my actions, sir." Richard gave a faint smile. "Good. Do it." Leaving the office, Charlotte took my hand, squeezing gently. "You've got this, Logan," she whispered. I smiled, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. This wasn't just a chance to prove myself to Richard. It was a chance to prove to myself that I could rise above the darkness, that I could live a life worth living. From then on, I threw myself into work with renewed energy. By day, I gave my all at the service center, mentoring the team, tackling the toughest issues. At night, I enrolled in online courses in operations management and leadership, studying in my small Denver apartment under a desk lamp, scribbling notes until my eyes burned. Charlotte stayed with me often, bringing coffee and encouragement. "You're doing great, Logan. Don't stop." 3 years later, I was appointed regional director for the central region of Brooks Automotive Group, overseeing all service centers in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Under my leadership, productivity rose by 70% and customer complaints dropped to nearly zero. On the day of my promotion, Charlotte hugged me tightly, whispering, "Dad said you've done what few others could, turned pain into strength." I looked at her, then out at Denver's sunlit sky. For the first time in years, I felt truly worthy, not just of Charlotte's love, but of this life. But life, as I've learned, never lets you rest. In my new role, I often reviewed M&A reports, long lists of financially struggling companies, potential prey for Brooks Automotive Group to acquire. One autumn afternoon, as the fading sunlight spilled across my desk, I skimmed through a stack of files and my heart stopped. A name jumped out at me: Carter Automotive Supply. My father's company, Harold Carter's. The note beside it was cold as a verdict. Liquidity crisis, $2 million in bank debt. I sat frozen, gripping the paper tightly. The file detailed everything: ill-fated investments in unviable projects, poor management under Jonathan's leadership, and worse, a scandal involving fraudulent parts inspections that drove major clients away. The company was teetering on the edge of collapse, like a sinking ship in the middle of the ocean. A fire of resentment flared inside me, hot and sharp. I remembered the day I begged my parents for help, the day they refused $70,000 to save Sophie, their granddaughter. I recalled Harold's cold stare, Martha's cutting words, and Jonathan's photo from a luxury resort while I buried my daughter. All those memories converged into a single burning point in my chest, but I didn't let anger control me. I'd learned that hatred only weakens you, not strengthens you. I took a deep breath, set the file down, and began to plan. This wasn't revenge. It was justice, a way to close the past on my terms. I called in the Brooks legal team requesting a thorough evaluation of Carter Automotive Supply. Within days, they painted a clear picture. My father's company had no way out. The bank had issued a final notice threatening to seize assets within weeks. I proposed to the Brooks board a rescue package. The group would take over all assets and absorb the $2 million debt in exchange for Harold selling the company for a symbolic price: $70,000. The number wasn't random. It was a bitter reminder of the sum they had denied Sophie, the money that could have saved her. I knew Harold would object. And as expected, when the offer was sent, he called Brooks, his voice trembling with rage. $70,000. This is an insult. This company is worth millions. I listened to a recording of the call in an internal report, staying silent. He had no idea I was behind the deal. In the end, when the bank's final notice arrived, Harold gritted his teeth and signed the contract. I didn't feel triumph, only a strange coldness. This wasn't a victory. It was the end of a painful chapter, and I wanted to be the one to close it. The signing took place in Brooks Automotive Group's large conference room. Fluorescent lights glinted off the Carter Automotive Supply logo on the screen, bright but cold, like a farewell. My family, Harold, Martha, and Jonathan, sat waiting on the other side of the table, their faces tense. Harold tried to maintain an air of dignity, but his hands trembled on the table. Martha sat beside him, eyes red, while Jonathan bowed his head, his gaze lost and childlike. When the conference room door opened, I walked in, wearing the black suit Charlotte had picked out for me. The room fell silent. Martha froze, her hands gripping the chair as if she might fall. Jonathan stood abruptly, stammering, "Logan, you," but trailed off. Harold stared at me, his face rigid, trying to maintain composure, but his eyes widened with shock and bitterness. I said nothing, just nodded in greeting and sat across from them. The secretary placed the contract in front of me. The scratch of the pen on paper sounded sharp, like the final note of the Carter family's pride. I signed my name, Logan Carter, each stroke deliberate, without hesitation. Harold bowed his head, unable to look at me. Martha's tears fell, her shoulders shaking, while Jonathan stood frozen, his eyes a mix of fear and shame. I didn't look at any of them. I turned to the secretary and said softly, "Finalize the paperwork." As I left the conference room, a light rain fell over Denver. I stood under the awning, opening my palm to catch the drops, and pulled out an old Carter Automotive Supply business card I'd kept from my Bozeman days. The ink had smudged in the rain, the logo fading like my father's empire. I knew the power game was over. Their fate was in my hands, the son they had once discarded. Charlotte waited for me in the lobby, her eyes gentle but concerned. "You okay?" she asked, taking my hand. I nodded, giving a faint smile. "I'm fine. Just closing an old chapter." She squeezed my hand tighter, asking no more, as if she understood some pains were mine to carry alone. Years have passed since I signed the contract to acquire Carter Automotive Supply, and my life has transformed completely. I married Charlotte, and we live in a quiet suburban home near Denver, where maple trees blaze red every autumn and small roads lead to sprawling fields of grass. The house isn't grand, but it's warm, with a crackling fireplace in winter and the sound of Eli, our 3-year-old son, laughing through the rooms. Eli has bright eyes just like Sophie's, and every time I see him running and playing, it's as if I see my daughter's little light, vibrant and alive. Life now is filled with simple joys I once thought I'd never have again. Mornings begin with the smell of coffee Charlotte brews, her humming an old tune in the kitchen. Evenings are spent with Eli on the rug, stacking wooden blocks or reading stories, his laughter washing away my fatigue. But in quiet moments, when Eli is asleep and Charlotte reads by the fire, I think of Sophie. Her clear voice, radiant smile, and scribbled drawings. They live in me, never fading. I no longer harbor resentment or anger, only a gentle longing like a breeze across a field. While my life has brightened, my old family, my parents and Jonathan, has fallen into darkness. After selling Carter Automotive Supply, they lost the pride they once clung to. Their lavish Denver mansion was sold to pay debts, and they moved to a small rented house in the suburbs. Harold, my father, who once declared, "This family doesn't need anyone," collapsed in his office a week after learning I was behind the acquisition. Doctors said it was a stroke caused by stress and spiking blood pressure. He survived but is paralyzed on his left side, his speech labored, his ability to work gone. Martha, my mother, had to hire a physical therapist for him, costing over $10,000 a month. Their finances drained quickly like water slipping through fingers. Jonathan, my brother, the promising heir my parents once championed, now flounders in debt and failure. He who never worried about money works odd jobs at an auto parts store to scrape by. His wife, fed up with their poverty, left with their young child, leaving him in a cramped rental with our ailing parents. One autumn afternoon, as red maple leaves blanketed our yard and I played with Eli outside, Charlotte came in, her voice soft. "Logan, someone's here to see you." I looked up and saw my mother at the gate, frail and gray, her hair whiter than I remembered. She looked aged, her eyes red, her trembling hands clutching an old bag. I stood, told Eli to go inside with his mom, and walked out to face her. "Logan," she said, her voice choked. "I'm sorry. I know we were wrong. Terribly wrong. Your father is very sick. We have nothing left. Please, Logan, help us. Just $50,000 for his treatment." I looked at her, the woman who turned her back when I begged for Sophie's life. Her eyes now held only exhaustion and regret, but I felt no anger, just a cold stillness. I went inside and retrieved the small journal I'd kept during the years of caring for Sophie. Its pages, stained with smudged ink, recorded every hospital bill, every sleepless night by her bedside, every unanswered prayer. I handed it to her and said softly, "I've already given Dad the most valuable gift, to understand the pain others have endured." Martha took the journal, opened it, and her tears fell, smudging the words. She read silently, her shoulders shaking as if each word was a knife. I stood there watching, but said nothing more. When she looked up, her eyes pleading for something, I only shook my head. "Go home, Mom," I said. "I can't help." After that, I quietly severed all ties with my old family. I no longer held hatred or sought revenge. The past had punished them in the cruelest way, forcing them to live with the late realization of what they'd done. I chose to move forward, not to prove anything to them, but to live for myself, for Charlotte, for Eli, and for Sophie. Every year on the anniversary of Sophie's passing, Charlotte, Eli, and I visit her grave. The small Fort Collins cemetery remains peaceful, with rows of bare trees and a gentle breeze. Eli, with eyes as bright as his sister's, places a small sunflower on her headstone, innocently asking, "Dad, can she see us?" I kneel, ruffle his hair, and smile. "Yes, buddy. She's always watching us." My story isn't just a journey of reclaiming justice from the past. It's proof that pain, if you learn to embrace and transform it, can become your greatest strength. I lost everything. Sophie, Grace, my trust and family. But I didn't lose myself. In my darkest days, sitting alone in a cold garage listening to Sophie's distorted singing through an old radio, I chose to stand up. Not because I was strong, but because I didn't want Sophie to become a fading memory. I wanted her to live on in the way I live, in the way I love. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of pain's control, refusing to let it steer you. When I handed my mother that journal, when I refused to help my old family, it wasn't revenge. It was my way of telling them, and myself, that I had moved on. They, with their pride and coldness, had imprisoned themselves in a cage of regret. I didn't need to do anything more. Life had done it for me. Looking back, my journey feels like an old machine I used to fix. Broken, rusted, seemingly beyond repair. But with enough patience, with those late-night turns of a wrench, it could start again, running smoother than ever. I didn't have a prestigious education or a supportive family, but I had my hands, my heart, and a promise to Sophie. That was all I needed to rebuild my life. If you ask me the greatest lesson from those years, I'd say the true value of a person lies not in their origins or possessions, but in how they face adversity. When the world turns its back, when every door closes, use your own hands to open another. I did it not because I'm exceptional, but because I didn't give up. And sometimes the miracle doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from your own persistence. Charlotte and Eli are proof that light exists, even in the darkest days. Charlotte, with her gentle smile and unshakable belief, pulled me out of the shadows. Eli, with his clear laughter and bright eyes, reminds me that life always offers new beginnings. But Sophie, my little light, taught me how to stand, how to love, how to forgive. She's no longer here, but she's never truly gone. If you're standing in the dark, as I once was, remember, the light never goes out. It may be faint, distant, but it's always there, waiting for you to be patient enough to reach it. Don't fear pain. Let it become fuel, as I did. And if you've been hurt by family, by those closest to you, by losses that can't be undone, don't seek revenge through hatred. Answer them with a better life. Because when you stand tall, when you live well, that's the most powerful response of all. I look back at Charlotte and Eli standing by the grave, the breeze tousling Eli's hair. Charlotte smiles, her eyes saying everything will be okay. I kneel, placing my hand on the inscription, Sophie Carter, Daddy's little light, and whisper, "Thank you, sweetheart, for giving me strength." The wind carries the scent of dry grass, and I feel Sophie smiling, somewhere in the fading sunlight. We leave the cemetery hand in hand, walking toward the waiting car. The Rockies in the distance glow orange, like a promise that tomorrow will come again. I squeeze Charlotte's hand, hold Eli close, and keep walking. Life, after all, isn't about what you lose. It's about what you choose to build from the ashes.